Hi there, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me here for the part 2 of the teacher interview series. I know there's a lot of teachers who are doing this right now, and I just think that's really fabulous because the more exposure and experience you can get with those teacher interview questions, the better prepared that you are going to be. So hopefully the questions that I give to you are going to be questions that you really do experience in the teacher interview. These are questions I have personally been asked, and so I know that they do get asked in teacher interviews. So I'm actually just going to use my flashcards and show you the question and then tell you how I would answer it. I didn't want the video to go too long, so I think I'm just going to do like the top 10 answer or interview questions, so that way you just kind of get the top 10, and then I will make sure that down below in the comments you have that list of interview questions that I myself have been asked, so that way you can make your own flashcards to prepare for the interview. So this is the question that I almost always get asked the very first time when I'm in the interview. And this is the question that is, tell us about yourself. Now, when they ask this question, what I've always done is just given a really brief overview of where I grew up, and then I just jump into my college education and my experience with teaching. Or if I'm a new teacher, I would jump into my education and my experience with youth that are the same or a similar age to those school that I'm interviewing for. So if I was interviewing for a junior high, then I would want to really emphasize my experience with junior high aged youth if I haven't taught a lot. Or if I'm doing high school, I would really want to emphasize my experience with high school age students outside of the classroom. So this is how I would answer the question. So tell us about yourself. Well, I grew up in Northern California and I spent most of my life there. I moved a lot. I think I moved to probably like 10 or 11 schools before I graduated high school. We just moved a lot. My family was not in the military. And so when I went to college, I actually decided to spend my entire 7.5 years of education, or 8.5 years, or 8 years of education at the same university. So I went to Sacramento State University. For my bachelor's degree, I really wanted to become a social studies teacher, so I studied social science. For a brief amount of time, I did switch to English because I thought, nah, I think I really want to be an English teacher. And then I switched back to social studies because I just really love history and geography and geology, and I got to study that in my major. After I received my bachelor's degree, I went through and applied to their bilingual multicultural credential program. Now, this was a credential program that I had actually heard about in high school, which is the reason that I went to that university in particular. So all of the classes in this bilingual and multicultural program were emphasized on how to educate students who were bilingual or trilingual or multilingual, and how to educate students who came from multicultural backgrounds. Now, I myself am not bilingual, though I do know a fair amount of German. However, it would not actually be helpful for me if I was bilingual in a certain language, because in my first year of student teaching, I had like 9 or 10 different languages in my classroom. So though it would have helped 5 to 7 students in my class, wouldn't have helped everyone. And so what I really enjoyed about that bilingual multicultural credential program is that all my classes emphasize on how to support English learners and how to build cultural awareness and just love of our cultures in the classroom. After I finished my credential program, I actually spent about 6 months working for a nonprofit where I traveled to Eastern Africa and in the East Coast of the United States, raising awareness and working towards getting a bill passed, and first introduced to Congress and then passed. After my internship ended, I came back and I started looking for teaching positions, where I found my first position teaching one period of history and multiple periods of language arts. I really found that I didn't know a lot about language arts, even though I was considered qualified because I had supplemental authorization at the time. So I decided to go back to graduate school and get a master's in language and literacy, where I eventually earned my specialist in reading and language arts credential. Now I'm actually credentialed to teach any of the social sciences, English, because I have since taken and passed the CSET for English, and I have the specialist in reading and language arts credential, which allows me to assess and provide intervention for struggling readers, and then additionally to provide professional development and support to teachers as well. Further, I have taught anywhere from 6th to 11th grade. I've taught 6th through 9th grade English and then 10th and 11th grade ELD. I have taught 6th grade history and then I did teach 9th grade honors English as well. Another question that I frequently get asked is this one here. What is your philosophy of teaching? So here, I think they're just trying to get to know you as a teacher and what you believe about teaching. So this is how I personally would answer this question. As an educator, I believe that all students can learn. And when I say all, I really mean all students. So I work really hard to differentiate and provide academic support to all of my students. If they're English learners, I provide a lot of access to sentence frames for written and oral language, as well as paragraph frames or even essay frames if we need to go that far. I use the gradual release of instruction to support all of my students in the classroom. I look really carefully through the IEPs and 504s to make sure that I set all of my students up for success. I also believe that it's really important that students engage in a lot of talk and discussion in the classroom, and so I make it a point to provide a lot of discussion time with sentence frames to guide their academic discussion in the classroom. I also want my students to work on engaging collaboratively because as we grow up and we enter the workforce, we will all be collaborating on some level with people. And so it's really important that my students develop those skills. I think it's important to also integrate technology into the classroom. And so I use technology to support oral and written language as well. Further, I believe that it is really important to develop a strong community in the classroom. So to do this, I use a program, or I guess a textbook. It's called Tribes, and it's called Tribes Discovering Gifts in Middle School. And so I use this book to help me or guide me in building community in my classroom. And this starts from the moment my students enter the classroom with a high five or a handshake or an elbow bump if a lot of kids are sick. But I just want kids to know that they are valued and wanted and cared about. And so I work really hard in the classroom to build that community through activities, through supporting each other in our journey as readers and writers, and providing a lot of feedback from me, but also teaching the students to give positive feedback to each other in the classroom. I believe that when students feel supported and validated and cared about, they'll follow you anywhere as a teacher because they trust you that you have the best interests in mind for them. Another question that I often get asked is describe a typical class period. That's actually not a question, that's a statement, but you get the general idea. So what they're looking for is what is it like if they were to walk into your classroom and what would they expect? So this is how I would answer this question. In a typical class period, students can expect for me to greet them at the door. When they come through the classroom, they will have practice and understand the routine of how to begin class. On the board, every day will be the do now for students. Typically, my do now is directions on what to get out so that they can begin class, and then a direction to either complete an oral or written language activity or to dive right into their independent reading where they are engaging with the text and using sentence frames to respond to questions that grow their critical thinking as they read. After the do now, we do review the do now and then we move on from there into our lesson. So if this is a day where I'm introducing a new text, you could expect to have a brief 5 to 10 minute period where I am building background knowledge about the text. So this could be something like a pictorial input chart. This could be something where I am providing access to vocabulary for students by showing visuals and pictures, and students take notes on the vocabulary words. Or we could do a picture walk through our textbook to build that background knowledge or familiarity with the text. Now, as an educator and as someone who teaches reading, I believe that modeling reading is incredibly important to youth. And so you could expect to hear me read through the text the very first time for students. So I would actually read through the text, and then I use a lot of fluency strategies to keep my students attentive and on task. So for instance, one of them is as I'm reading, I will pause and omit a word, and then the classroom will fill in the missing word, and then I will continue reading. This is to ensure that students are tracking with me. After we complete the reading, we will actually read the text again. So we would answer a question such as, what's the main idea of the text? We would discuss our answer. I might focus on a vocabulary term from the text itself that will enhance their understanding. And then we would do a choral read of the text, or we would choral read chunks of the text. Occasionally I'll have students do partner reads of the text where one partner will read and omit a word and the other partner will fill in the missing word so that they can keep each other accountable to their reading. And then, if it's still our first time reading through the text, I would do a third read with my students because I want them to really grasp and understand the meaning of this text, and so we would do a third read. Now, if I've had my students throughout the year and this is the middle of the year, I might assign that third read as silent independent reading, or I would have them do a partner read where they read back and forth, or a choral read, whichever one we didn't do on that second read. Now, remember, I have had a lot of experience teaching students who are struggling readers and English learners, so a lot of these strategies are strategies I use in my class with my English learners as well. So after we've completed the reading, we would do some kind of a post-reading activity. Sometimes it would be something where we give opinions about the topic, maybe a four corners activity where students are getting up and moving. We might create questions about the text, such as comprehension questions. Students would write them down on a flashcard, and then we would get up out of our seats and do a quiz trade. So that way students are moving, but they're engaging and thinking about the text as well. Now, that would probably bring us to the end of a class period. Just note, I would not do this if this was a novel because that's a really long text to do multiple reads through. I'm imagining that this is a shorter passage, maybe 1 or 2 pages long at the most. Now, at the end of the period, we would do some kind of exit ticket. So this exit ticket might be a reflection on what they learned that day, a reflection on what stuck with them. It might be a question about a vocabulary word that was introduced, or a question such as an author and me question, or an on my own question where the students are reflecting about their engagement with the text. I would then use this as a formative assessment to see what stuck with students and what I need to work on for the due now the following day. A lot of schools now are moving towards a 1-to-1 ratio of computers and students. And so I have often come across this question, how do you integrate technology in your classroom? So this is how I would answer that question. First of all, I love technology. I participated in an education technology academy that lasted over a school year. We met 7 different times. I've also attended multiple ed camps so that I can get a better understanding of educational resources and tools that are available to teachers. One of my favorite programs that I use in my classroom is called Flipgrid. Flipgrid is a really neat oral discussion, it's a video discussion program that students can use to engage with each other across the classroom in oral discussion. What's really neat about this is that I can also manage this on the teacher side where I could have students in different class periods engaging in discussion. Now, if I had the technology released to do this, I could also have students who are reading the same book, like let's say To Kill a Mockingbird, have an oral discussion with students on the other side of the country with a teacher who's also reading that book in their class. And so this is a really neat program to use with your students. It's really high interest, plus it teaches students about the art of doing oral and video discussion. And so I really introduced this program by discussing the way we use technology in the world now and how a lot of jobs actually are remote jobs. And so students will be using technology and video chat in their careers most likely in the future. Other ways I have used technology in the classroom is I've actually had experience in a school site where my textbook was on the computer as a computer program, and so every day the students were on the computers. They each had their own computer and they were reading on the computer. They were learning to highlight and to move or select text, much like they do on the new state assessments. And further, I have also used programs to quiz kids like Kahoot in the classroom, a fun and engaging way to assess students. It goes really quickly, it sets up like a game, but it gives me a clearer understanding of kind of where kids are if they're really trying their best. Plus, Kahoot can be really fun if you're coming up on a holiday and kids always want a party or some kind of celebration. So I pull out a fun holiday-related Kahoot and we'll play that for 5 minutes in the class, and then we move on to our content of what we need to be doing. I have really extensively used Google Classroom in my classroom, and so students can go into Google Classroom, open a document, and then they can submit their assignments in Google Classroom, where I then give feedback on the computer as well to students where they can actually revise and return in their work. I've linked from News ELA in the Google Classroom suite, so that way it just makes it easy for students to just jump straight to the article that I have assigned for them to read. Another common question that I receive is this one here: how do you increase communication between school and home? Now, schools really want to know, are you going to be a teacher who really has clear communication with the parents at home? Now, if you teach junior high, then you know that junior high students do not always go home and tell their parents what's happening at school, especially if they're misbehaving. You could send a letter home with them, but there's a good chance that that letter is not going to find a parent's eyeballs. And so, as an educator, it's really important that you have good communication. So this is how I would answer that question. Communicating with parents is really important, and it can be a very integral part of a student's success. So as an educator, I have a format or a document that I use to track my phone calls home. Now, I make it a point to make positive phone calls home every week. And if there's an off chance that I have to do a negative phone call home, where I have to share with a parent a student has not made some very positive choices in the class, I look for that student to make a good choice in the next 2 to 3 days, and then I follow up with that parent with a positive phone call home, because I want to build a good positive relationship with not just that parent but also that student. I've used Class Dojo in my class very, very often when I've taught the 5th or 6th grade level. I know that there's an upper grade level called Class Craft, which is much more developmentally appropriate to that grade. Now, through Class Dojo, I can directly connect to parents through their phones, where we can actually message back and forth. So it's much like texting. However, it's not through my phone number, because I do not want parents to have my personal phone number. And so I message with them through Class Dojo. Now, parents can also keep track of the positive or negative choices that their students have been making in the classroom through Class Dojo as well. So that's one way I keep clear communication between parents and students. Additionally, I do send home newsletters, or I send home updates through Class Dojo to let parents know what we're working on that week in the classroom. A very common question that you will get asked in an interview is, what approaches do you use for classroom management? So, this is how I would answer that question. This is a really important question, because schools want to know that you can handle a classroom. Classroom management is so important, and it is the heart of success in a classroom. As a teacher, I have learned a lot of tools along the way, and I know that there is no perfect blanket fix for any classroom. That all classrooms are made up of unique personalities that come together to create a unique community. So as a teacher, I need to be adaptable with a lot of tools. So some examples of people that I use, or I guess people who've written books that I've used in my class, are Lee Cantor, Fred Jones, and Doug Lemov. Now, these are some of my favorite people that I have gotten advice from about classroom management. I also employ a lot of Kagan strategies to increase the engagement of my students, which also helps me manage my students. So from Lee Cantor, I borrowed his 3-step process to providing clear, explicit directions and intervention when students do not make good choices. So the first step in Lee Cantor's 3-step process is to make sure you give very explicit and clear directions. So for instance, if I tell my students to please walk across the classroom, get your Read 180 folders, and then walk back to your desk, I might have students who get up and they saunter across the room, or they run across the room, or they are touching other students along the way. So with Lee Cantor, I need to be very explicit, and I will tell my students, when I say go, because I want you to listen to all my directions, when I say go, I want you to walk with your hands and feet to yourself, get your Read 180 folder, and come back to your desk and open to page 32. what page are you opening to? And I'll wait, and then I will say, go. And then I'll turn around and write 32 on the board so that when students forget, I can just point to it. Now the second part is to narrate the student behavior. This is a positive way to restate your directions without going crazy as a teacher, because it drives us all crazy when we have to repeat our directions over and over. So for instance, I would say, I see Michael is walking with his hands to himself. He's not touching anyone. I see Jose is keeping his hands to himself, and he's picked up his Read 180 book. Now, I can be strategic about how I narrate for students, because I will narrate next to a student who is off task. And this is to let them know that, hey, I see you, but I'm giving you some grace to try again. Most of the time, the student will self-correct. If in that case the student does not self-correct, I move to step 3, which is a private intervention, where I will go to that student and I will restate the directions, I will restate our classroom rule, and then I will ask them to restate them back to me as well. And then from that place, we will determine what the appropriate consequence is. From Doug Lemov, I really focus a lot on his 100% strategy. When I give directions, I expect 100% of you to follow my directions. And if you do not, then we will go back to where we were before and we will start again until I get 100%. Now this also begins from when the students are lined up outside of my classroom waiting to come in, and they enter the classroom and they greet me and begin the do now. So if I have a lot of rowdy students walking into the classroom, I will send the entire class outside. They will pack their belongings. They will go back outside and stand in a line. And if we need to do this 2, 3, 5, 10 times before we have excellent behavior and follow the directions, we will do that, because I want to make sure that it is explicit and clear that my directions need to be followed the first time. And yes, it does seem like it wastes a lot of time in the beginning of the school year, but come February, March, and April, the students in my classroom understand that they follow the directions the first time, and we do not waste our class time, because what we are learning is very important. The third person I mentioned is Fred Jones. Now, I know Fred Jones typically has been written for the elementary level classroom. However, I believe there's a lot of crossover that's very successful in the middle school, and yes, even can be applied to the high school. So the idea I'm mostly focusing on is this idea of PAT time, or preferred activity time. So in my class, I use a combination of Fred Jones's PAT time and Class Dojo points to help build a positive community in my classroom. I have always worked at schools where we use PBIS, which is that positive behavior intervention system, to really increase the positive in our classroom so that students get addicted to that wonderfulness of making good choices, and we celebrate that by awarding Class Dojo points. Now, individually, students earn points they can spend in a class store on items such as like sit in the teacher's chair for a day, have lunch with the teacher, get to leave class, I don't know, 15 seconds or 10 seconds early, so you get to be in front of the lunch line, which is something I do talk to yard duty about. So I provide incentives for the students to make excellent choices. I give lots of pencils in the Class Dojo store. Students love that because they never have pencils in junior high. I also use whole class rewards, and the rewards that students earn for whole class points are community activities. Now these are so important because they give us an additional reason to build a sense of belonging and community in the classroom. Another question that I get often, and I actually really hate, is the what are your strengths and weaknesses as a teacher question. Now, the reason I don't like this is because I feel like teachers are not going to really say what they're not good at. So, I don't know. It's just, I always get asked this in an interview, so I've kind of come up with a strategy for answering this question truthfully, but in a way that's actually really positive. So this is how I would answer the weakness part of this question. So one of my weaknesses as a teacher, and I know this is really terrible, but it's just who I am, is that I can be super forgetful when I am in front of the classroom. And that's not a great thing. So what I do is I keep a sticky note pad and I keep a clipboard up wherever I'm teaching, if I have a table or a podium or a technology stand, and I keep it up there. So when a student asks me a question that I don't know the answer to, I will either give them the sticky note pad and have them write the question down, or I will write it down so that I don't forget. Also, if I'm teaching or the students are doing independent work and something kind of pops in my head that I need to really remember, I write it down really quickly on my sticky note. Now, when I give consequences to students, because we have so many students in our classrooms, I can sometimes forget who I gave those consequences to. So I always jot that down on my clipboard, which I have a list, like a student roster on there, and I change this out every week because every week and every day is a new time for students to make good choices. And so I know it's kind of sad that I forget a lot of things while I'm teaching, but it's just we are doing so many things as a teacher, and we're managing and we're making sure students are learning, we're assessing, we're delivering instruction, and we're keeping an eye out for students who are following directions. And so it just, it's just kind of tough to remember everything. So I just use my sticky note system. It's really effective. It really helps me stay accountable. But I think it also lets the students know that it's okay to not be perfect, and that when you struggle with something, you just find a system that helps you be successful. Now, my final question for you today is also a really common question I get in the teacher interview, and this is the question of, what experience do you have collaborating? There we go. What experience do you have collaborating with other teachers? Now, school districts want to know that you are a person who can work with other people. So this is how I would answer this question. Collaborating with other teachers is really important because, first of all, I don't know everything there is to know about teaching 6th grade language arts. And so I love that I can go to my team and we can share our ideas and our perspectives, and we can work together to find solutions to problems that we have in the classroom. Additionally, I love that as a 6th grade team, we lesson plan together to make sure we're all headed in the same direction. We look for patterns across all of our classes in our data analysis, and then we work together to provide assessments, or not assessments, lessons and then assessments to our students in the classroom. Now, something I really loved this last year working with my 6th grade team is that occasionally one of us would get 1 day or 2 days ahead or behind of the other teachers. Now, the benefit to this was that occasionally there would be a lesson in our new curriculum that we were using where it just wasn't a really good lesson for our particular student. And so, for instance, I went through Unit 1 of the Roald Dahl unit of our new curriculum, and on Lesson 4, there was this terrible lesson on dependent markers. Now, dependent markers are important, and they are in the 6th grade grammar standards. However, the way this was introduced to students was so confusing that I actually had to spend 2 additional class periods doing damage control on that lesson. So the nice thing about collaborating once a week with that 6th grade team was that I got to go to them and tell them, don't do this lesson, because it was really confusing. And so we were able to modify the lesson for their classes that made it so when they had that instruction delivered to their students, it was successful the first time. And then we made notes in our program curriculum and our curriculum guide to either skip or modify that lesson for next time, because it created a lot of wasted time in our lessons. Now further, because I am a reading and language arts specialist, I have been asked on a couple of occasions to provide some support to other teachers, such as like modeling how to teach summaries, or modeling how to teach how to cite text evidence, or just modeling certain lessons. And so I have also done that one-on-one or to like a couple of teachers as well when they've asked me to. So those are like the top 10 questions I typically get asked in an interview. It's really important that you practice your answers to those interview questions. I hope that the questions that I have shared are different from the questions other teachers are sharing in their vlogs right now, because the more exposure you can get to teachers giving their answers, I think the better prepared you're going to feel, and the more confident that you're also going to feel as a teacher going into your interview. Don't forget, down below in the comments you will find the list of the common interview questions I personally have encountered, so that way you can go and make your teacher flashcards and then study them so that you are prepared for your first teacher interview. If you think there is a really important question that I missed, please share that down below in the comments. If you have any questions that you just want some feedback about, I am happy to answer those questions. Now, I can't guarantee that any of this will help you get a job, but I just think that the more you practice and the more exposure you can get from other teachers to what the experience is like, just the more confident you are going to feel as a teacher when you go into your interview. So I also recognize that I'm like not a perfect teacher. So if you watched any of my questions and you're someone who sits on an interview panel and you think you wouldn't hire me at your school, that's totally okay because I know that I am not a good fit for every school and every school is not a good fit for me. And that's okay because I'm really happy where I am. And I really like my kids, I really like my school, I really like my colleagues. And so just know that I just want to help, and so I hope I've been helpful. If you have any questions, please just leave them down below in the comments, and have a great day.